Thank you, Arvind, for that very generous introduction, for reminding me that I don't know how to say no and that I talk too much. But anyway, but thank you also for asking me to speak to your conference, because the IDSA Asian Security Conference has become an annual event that I think we all look forward to as an occasion where you review Asian issues and where we learn from each other. And as usual, you have from your agenda that I could see a very impressive list of participants and a very topical and full agenda. I thought that I might briefly try and describe a few salient aspects of the Asian situation, of this present situation in the Asia Pacific, as I see it. I say I, this is not the government of India. And then maybe suggest something of what we might do about it. But what I'd really like to do is to hear from you and maybe to have a discussion thereafter, rather than a question and answer. From an Indian point of view, since we are located where we are, at the intersection of West Asia and what is now called the Asia Pacific, until very recently, Asia appeared to be heading in different directions, whether you looked west or you looked east. But today, in 2014, whichever way you look, the factors of uncertainty have increased manifold, and the sense of insecurity. And the reasons why this is so, to the west of us, I think, are well known. We've all analyzed, looked at the turmoil in West Asia. I think it's probably been over-analyzed. If anything, the situations in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, the transitions in Afghanistan, and so on. But it's much less obvious why this should be so, why there should be increased uncertainty and the fear of instability, actually, in the Asia Pacific, and why East Asia is much less harmonious today than it was a few years ago. One reason could be that the Asia Pacific is a very crowded geopolitical space, with the active involvement in its affairs of several established and rising or re-emerging powers, some external, some intrinsic to the region. But you know, it's been so since the beginning of the 19th century. So what has changed to increase uncertainty and insecurity? I can think of 4 immediate reasons. For one, it's not just that Asia Pacific is getting more crowded, as China, several other powers re-emerge on the geopolitical stage. It's the simultaneous emergence of several powers that has built pressure for a new equilibrium and balance. And that new equilibrium or balance hasn't emerged because the pace of change in the balance of power is so rapid. Secondly, the rapid economic growth in the last few decades has given several states in the region the means to militarily strengthen themselves. I mean, East Asia has seen the most rapid accumulation of economic power in world history, and it's now seeing the same in terms of military power. And if you look at the Asia Pacific as a whole, it's witnessing really the greatest peacetime arms build-up in its history, possibly in world history. Thirdly, technology and politics have eliminated distance and separation between the powers. We now speak of the Asia Pacific as one geopolitical unit, not of East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, separately. What happens in the South China Sea and the East China Sea concerns and affects the entire region, if not the world. And you mentioned cyber technology, ICT, weapons technologies have eliminated the separations that existed between powers in the region. And to my mind, most important, you know, we take for granted the removal of ideological restraints on the use of force, the threat of its use, even though that's a relatively recent phenomenon. And the absence of ideology has really resulted in renewed internal debates and political arguments in several major Asia-Pacific countries. That's true. You see this in China, you see this in Japan, you see it in India as well. At the risk of oversimplifying. The debate is between liberal internationalists, reformers on the one hand, and sort of ultranationalist conservatives on the other. The reformers seek more international cooperation and are committed to more international values, to international solutions to these problems. The conservatives seek to recover lost territory and status, imagined or real, and seek a position of dominance or possibly hegemony. And the ultranationalists use a narrative of humiliation, of pride, of resentment against limitations of capacity, of reality, to achieve their purposes. And an essential part of this narrative is a threat inflation industry. And in many countries, it's the conservatives, it's this narrative with its emotional appeal which is loudest in the public discourse, not the cool reason and the compromise that the reformers offer. I know it's an oversimplification, but you see this increasingly through the region. Now, each of these things, the four things that I mentioned, on its own might not have been a cause for worry. Even taken together, they could have been manageable. But they come at a time of increased doubt about the security architecture in the Asia-Pacific, and just when a new balance of power is emerging. For 40 years, since the US opening to China, the Asia-Pacific has known relative stability under a security order in which the US provided security guarantees for the status quo. Today, the US itself is rebalancing back to the region, and there's heightened uncertainty in the region. So, what do we do about this? And from our point of view, clearly, continued uncertainty or confrontation in the Asia-Pacific is in no one's interest. It will affect major powers' attempts to restructure their economies or to revive growth. Conflict would roll back the gains to each of our countries of 40 years of stability and peace. So clearly we need to act upon the repeated statements by all the countries in the region to build an open, inclusive security architecture in the region, adding content to the concept and implementing it as soon as possible. We're only at the very beginning, at the inception of this process, with the ARF, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Plus Dialogue and the East Asia Summit. It will, of course, be an Asian security architecture with Asian characteristics, but the political military equivalent of the open interlinked economic order that has so benefited the region. And I presume it would have to take into account the primarily maritime nature of many regional security issues and disputes, which are amenable to collective solutions. It seems to me that in building this architecture, we should concentrate on the security essentials that made the region's phenomenal economic growth possible. The commons on the high seas, airspace, cyberspace should be safe and open to all lawful civilian uses. And that is why maritime security and freedom of navigation is so important and should be one of the first orders of business. Openness about doctrines, about defense plans, about increased military contacts would also take some of the edge off the uncertainty. Although confidence-building measures can only hold the ring until the hard work of actually solving disputes and agreeing a rule-based legal order is done. Thank you for your patient hearing, and I do hope that your deliberations have resulted in much more clarity on the strategic trends than I have mentioned here, and that you will have ideas on the security architecture and the topics that we need to work on to ensure the peace and security that is so essential to Asia's common future. Thank you. Thank you very much.